ladies.
The worrying trend that we currently see in European countries is that we oftentimes have extreme right-wing parties that dominate the political discourse and also the policy making that exists. And we think that they have garnered lots of support within the society. Take, for example, the United Kingdom Independence Party that was behind Brexit happening. We also have the Golden Dawn Party in Greece, which has allowed things like anti-immigration laws and very racist policies towards individuals and peoples of color. You also have the party of Marine Le Pen that exists in France that was behind the ban of bikini and all of those things. And you also have Geert Wilders in the Netherlands that actively tries to say that Islam is a bad thing and therefore we should also ban Islam, something that Donald Trump got his inspiration from. We think that all of this rhetoric not only spews hate, but it also incites violence. We think that oftentimes we try to take the high road and provide some degree of discourse. We try to talk them out of it, saying that, you know what, these individuals are not necessarily bad and you want to create some mutual understanding. But we have passed that particular point. When these individuals are unwilling to listen, no thank you, we think that we need to take a different measure, and so that's why we think that having violence against the extreme right-wing parties that exactly incites violence should be justified. A few things that are outside of the House. This debate will take from the perspective of the marginalized communities that has become victims from these particular extreme right-wing parties. Things like, for example, LGBTs, people of color, immigrants, etc., etc. The way that the violence is going to happen is that we're going to tolerate whether it's going to be on an individual basis or if they decided to have it organized as well. We're willing to defend things such as riots, having property destruction, even to the extent of casualties. We're perfectly okay with that. Obviously, the extreme right-wing parties that we're talking about are self-evident. Those are on the conservative side on the conservative side that want ultra-nationalistic policies that want to empower only one particular community. For example, like the Nazi back then, like you want only to have the Aryan race. A lot of these people also want to empower white supremacy, and that's the kind of people that we're talking about. Few arguments in my speech. Number one, why the state has failed and why we think that the intelligent discourse is no longer the way to go. Second, why we think that this is the legitimate right of that community, how we think that it's important for them to express their dissatisfaction and anger towards a government that is constantly disenfranchising them. Thirdly, the benefit of this policy, how we think that this is going to trigger better policy making under our side of the House. First, why the status quo has failed. So let's characterize who these right-wing parties are, right? These are parties that actively tries to have like the conservative policies of making sure that people have a traditional lifestyle and also wants to empower those who has generally been privileged, like white people or Christians, etc., etc. Now, the way that they do this is that they spread hate towards campaigns on these minority communities. For example, saying things like immigrants are going to be there to take your jobs, gays in Lithuania are currently trying to destroy morality within that community, and so that's why they should be stoned. People of color and Muslims are inherently terrorists. These are the kinds of things that they use to convince people to vote for them. It's not about the virtue of their policy, but they're antagonizing a specific community as the reason why this policy is necessary. We have done lots of attempts to clarify. We have public debates, we have socialization, we've expressed lots of articles in The Economist, etc. Even when you look at Brexit, there's lots of discussions on why we should remain, why immigrants are good for the economy, etc. But we think those things have failed for three important reasons. Number one is oftentimes that these right-wing parties, the way that they respond, no thank you, is basically using strawman rebuttals, and something that the opposition is also going to do to our case. We think that what you do is that you attack the person. You don't, like, for example, if a person of color tries to clarify the merits of the policy, people will try to attack, for example, the racial heritage of that particular individual or the religion of that person. And this is something that you can see in Fox News when Reza Aslan tries to clarify Islam, and what is happening is that you don't clarify the content and more on the person saying that. So that's why we think that that discussion doesn't really evolve. Second of all, the audience themselves are generally undereducated. When they are constantly being in a bubble where religion, poverty, and white supremacy have this unholy trinity, we think what happens is that this is the default position that they see as the ultimate truth and guidance of their lives, so they're unwilling to listen to discourse. And finally, these right-wing parties capitalize on that particular sentiment and emotional bubble to galvanize their political support. That's why no compromise is happening right now. That's why status quo has failed. No thank you. Second argument, why do we think that then this is the legitimate right of the community? Two important reasons. Number one is obviously the principle of self-defense. And I know you guys have heard this argument in like so many debates today. So, but what's important is that when you as an individual or as a community has been attacked, you have the right to retaliate in response. And this is a principle that has been upheld in so many ways possible. We see on how nations wage war to other countries that have consistently attacked them, because precisely that the concept of right to live is the ultimate right that we believe in. And we think that when the moment in which that your life and survivability is at threat, you have the ultimate prerogative to make sure that you minimize that threat and ensure the continuance of your survival. We think that that same principle happens to abortion on how the fetus might necessarily harm the way that the mother lives. No, thank you. Second level is we think that this is a form of political class struggle. Because what you need to recognize is that oftentimes these individuals, LGBTs, immigrants, etc., they are disenfranchised from that particular community. For example, immigrants, they don't have the ability to vote within that particular country because they're not a citizen, right? So their votes are constantly unrepresented as well. People might not want to speak up for Islam or for LGBTs because they're a relatively controversial topic, and that's something that would lose political support for their side of the house. So that's why, because that they're constantly excluded from that political representation, and because that it's the government themselves that is dominated by these right-wing parties, they have the right to express their dissatisfaction to their oppressors. This is something that we see in eco-terrorism, when environmentalists try to attack companies that actively do the damage to ensure that the environment is safe. Third argument, why do you think that this triggers better policymaking? The basic premise of this argument is the security dilemma theory. What happens right now is that you constantly attack these individuals because you're under the premise that they would stay silent and just become marginalized every time. We think that the moment when you show retaliation, it shows that these communities actually have power, and therefore it becomes more politically unpopular for the government to actively to have like more supporting of more violence. So what happens then when you have too much violence, there would be a call to end that particular violence. And so that's what we think that brings to the negotiation table, right? Like for example, when you see countries that have these like wars, and eventually there was a call for reconciliation, etc. We think that is also the same logic that we want to apply. The types of outcome that we have from this is probably better regulation. We can, for example, have more amendments on hate speeches, which is exactly the root of the problem that causes a lot of hatred. I know you're tired of judging, but we think that opening government should take first initiative.
Ladies and gentlemen, we believe that in opening opposition, history often repeats itself. In many states, it has always been a shift of powers, it has always been a shift of main ideologies, ladies and gentlemen. Therefore, we contend that the current context of Europe also falls under the notion of how shifts of power and shifts of ideologies will always come as a result of dynamics inside society. That's why we see that in the past in Europe we had Nazism, but now we've changed our ways into, understanding that this value is wrong, and we understand that human rights is the way that we should be going right now. Numerous states in Central America has shifted between liberal economic policies into socialist policies, ladies and gentlemen. Nowadays we say that the current white supremacist trend is also going to falter at the end of the day. Why? Because we believe that if an ideology grows too long, ladies and gentlemen, the ideology will become corrupt in itself, and to a certain extent, society will acknowledge these faults of the system and therefore become a counterbalance to it in the very first place. We say that the current context of Europe is, the current growing white supremacists in Europe is way too toxic in itself that the system is faltering. We see an example of Brexit supporters now becoming disoriented, ladies and gentlemen, as to the reasons why they voted out to begin with. There are many now concerns regarding the lack of commitment of those who support the Brexit to begin with, Nigel Farage, and so on and so forth. We contend also that even in France, ladies and gentlemen, no thank you, Marine Le Pen is not that strong in terms of having powers, right? We say that the Labour Party in France still has other person aside from Hollande, whose name I forgot, I'm sorry, but he is also neck to neck with Marine Le Pen. It indicates that the notion of toxic white supremacists is already reaching its boiling point, ladies and gentlemen, to the extent that as the minority community, we should acknowledge it and therefore respond accordingly. And that is by staying silent and using peaceful means as what we have always been doing right now. Sit down. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, that's basically the first rebuttal. Second of all, in regards to systematic disenfranchisement, this is going to touch more to the affected appeal of this side of the house, right? We think that when, as marginalized communities, when we're talking about how we've been around due to systematic disenfranchisement, several questions need to be addressed, right? How then, by using violence, our political grievance will suddenly change, ladies and gentlemen? We don't see any explanation coming from that side of the house, because they're not just talking about a philosophical level as to why we can revolt, right? We need to also understand another philosophy in which we must be able to make sure that our well-being is also being maintained in our efforts to, have a better condition of life. We say that when they even contended that we are a minority, most likely the power who is going to come back at us is going to be larger, ladies and gentlemen, and we don't necessarily think that is a strategic means for us to defend ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. So at the end of the day, in the very first place, just saying systematic disenfranchisement does not necessarily mean we should revolt with violence. But second of all, ladies and gentlemen, we say that there's no hope that's necessarily absent from the parliamentary system. Because right now, with our current way of being peaceful, we also have political supports from individuals, from politicians inside the parliament, which are those who are left-wingers as us. We say, ladies and gentlemen, once we shift our ways to becoming right, for example, there will be less likely support for these individuals, for these politicians, to want to listen to our cause and fight inside parliamentary debates for us. That's why at the end of the day, we think that we must treasure the political capital that we have right now, and that's by adhering to the values of left-wingers as well as marginalized communities. No thanks. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about positive contribution coming from OO. But first of all, you must understand what do we envision Europe to be, right? And nowadays, we envision a country which is free from any cycle of vengeance, of hatred towards a certain group's identity, ladies and gentlemen. Right now, you might see hatred towards Muslims, immigrants. In Holland, you see sentiments to Moroccan people, right? We think that the rising phenomenon of right-wing parties could become a catalyst that plunges us back into the dark ages of Nazism, of how extremist politicians, a draconian and hawkish politician is prevalent inside Europe in the past. But because, ladies and gentlemen, it's not just, the fact that we also need to analyze, right, why they come up to begin with. We think that the possibility that they came up is also because of a certain counterbalance to the existing toxic narrative of extreme left, ladies and gentlemen. And we say, therefore, that this is actually a sort of justifiable means for these right wing to become who they are right now. But further than that, we say that what they have been the notion of the violence of right wingers is being brought up by their politicians to feel is because they feel a sense of disenfranchisement from the system, that there are threats to their identity, and the narrative is way too powerful that it results to the current hostility, ladies and gentlemen, sentiments towards people that's targeted by the politicians in order to grasp political power, for example, by targeting immigrants in order to get seats in the parliament. Therefore, we think that as individuals who feel like they are targeted by the right wings, we should not be dragged down to their level. Ladies and gentlemen, we must still contend the idea that development of ideas and development of identities or reconciliation can only happen through discourse. And it's by staying constantly true to our position and not become a part of the cycle of vengeance. We must empathize with them, ladies and gentlemen, with all the, the hardship that they've gone through, for example, and the grievances that these right wings might have felt, in order to make sure that we are able to maintain in our efforts to try to reconcile or engage in productive discourse, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, sure, one day.
Well, one UK member of parliament was shot to death because she supported women. Why do you think that the other side would want to listen when they have been silencing the voices of the dissent all the time?
But here's the thing, people will also think that the act of killing in itself is also wrong, ladies and gentlemen. We think that the counter-narrative to that is already there, and that more people is actually adhering to human rights anyway, right? So we think that eventually the appeal of staying peaceful is going to be larger in contrast to the existing narrative of violence. Secondly, ladies and gentlemen, not just for us to make sure that we remain true and still fight for a vengeance-free Europe, we also think that we also must consider the result of this policy, right? Because most likely the result of the violence which we will use is going to be utilized as a narrative by the right wings that further feeds their ego of right wing, ladies and gentlemen, which are first anti-establishment and secondly they're violent to begin with. Therefore, the harms are twofold. First, the right wings become more close-minded into thinking that the system is exactly rigged against them. The cause becomes more relatable because it's the people in the minority or the people who they think is rigging the system against them, who is doing it, the violence to them. But secondly, right, it becomes more chaotic because violence means that the other side justifies that ideas need to be physically exerted to indicate superiority, ladies and gentlemen. And we don't necessarily think that that will lead in any way to a country which feels that they can live side by side with one another, a country which don't feel any vengeance or hatred towards one another, and that's why you should only vote for opening opposition.
So I'm going to talk about three things in my speech. First of all, I'm going to talk to you why negotiating that we have right now is not going to work. Because what they actually claim is that according to the history, ideology will change. People will change, they will have empathy for this minority. But then based on the history, the reason why people changed is because there was war at the time. Right? There is a reason why people decided to let go of Nazism. There is a reason why people decided to let go of some bad treatments towards certain minorities, ladies and gentlemen. It shows you that violence is somehow important, or even, especially when it becomes the last resort. Why is violence so good, ladies and gentlemen? Here's the thing. When you do this negotiation, what's going to happen is that you actually give the chance for the other party to overpower you, and what's going to happen is that there will be an exchange of ideas. The harm that you feel from that is actually not that tangible. When you talk about violence, the harm is very tangible. It might not only harm you now, like your emotion during the debate, some people might have emotion in the debate, but also it also harms you in the future. For example, if you have a really serious wound, you're not going to be able to work in the future. Your family also going to be victims probably of the violence, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that this is exactly what pushes them to go to negotiation table, because they see, because there was a direct threat that they can feel, and this threat is not only felt by them, but also by other people who are related to them, ladies and gentlemen. And we also believe that this is going to change the direction of the party in the future, ladies and gentlemen. So when Gaby said they're going to retaliate, these people, they will have more justification to say that the system is rigged against them, they're going to even do something more worse things in the future. We believe that's not going to happen, because if they do that, there will be more violence happening, and we believe that it's always really the interest of these politicians to make sure that it's stable, because they also care about the economy, they also care about the security of the society. That's the reason what's going to force them to go to the negotiation table, because if they still do the same thing over and over again, the violence is going to be worse, and what's going to happen is that it's not going to be a good, conducive environment, not only for the minority, but also for them, ladies and gentlemen. This is what actually stops them from making hatred, from creating hatred, from making hate speech, ladies and gentlemen. Gaby also believes that we should not go down to their level, ladies and gentlemen. We have tried our best to be good. We have tried our best to empathize with them. We have tried to be at their level. But the problem is, in this debate, we're not talking about, we're talking about our brothers and sisters. We're also physically hurt by them. We have tried to engage with them all the time, but then they don't want to listen. So we believe that this is the only way for us to go. And I don't understand why the principle of please don't go down to their level is more important, ladies and gentlemen, than the survival of our fellow minority groups, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that these groups are supposed to be our concern, because A, we share the same suffering, B, they might also become the target of violence in the future, and C, sometimes they can't even do anything. We talk about the police or justice system. Many of them are also in favor of the majority, because they feel like, because they also care about, because they also listen to what the right-wing politicians say, ladies and gentlemen. We believe that the whole system is actually rigged against the minority, and the only way for us to do that is to negotiate with the right-wing politicians. But negotiation is not going to happen if there is no tangible harm that this politician might feel, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, Baim?
If we're being attacked physically, that's an obvious hate crimes and an obvious physical assault. Someone will, they can be criminalized for that.
This debate is not about whether or not it's going to be criminalized, ladies and gentlemen. This debate is about whether or not this is justified. Regardless of whether it's going to be criminalized or not, we should, as the minority groups, we should debate about whether or not it's justified. That's the job of the government, and we're not government in this debate. Now, I'm going to talk about how this is. Okay, very tricky. Okay, I'm going to talk about how this is going to be the starting point of change, of directions of right-wing parties. Ladies and gentlemen, there is a growing support for right-wing parties right now. And there's a reason why they managed to attract a lot of supporters, ladies and gentlemen. Some people, well, many people like them for multiple reasons. For example, because they agree with the negative sentiment, the discrimination or hate speech that these political parties have. And that's the reason why they become so powerful, ladies and gentlemen, because there is growing support, ladies and gentlemen. And these supporters of right-wing parties do not also see any harm of supporting these political parties. They even support the hate speech. They even support the negative sentiment that this political party have. And that's the reason why the cycle is always ongoing, because these political parties are still there, they're always supporters, and they support each other. That's what makes them so powerful. What we are trying to do right now is, we are going to change the calculus of their supporters. Because now, they will always try to disassociate themselves from these parties. Why? Because they don't want to be the victims of violence conducted by our minority groups. They don't want to be the people who might also feel the pain that this political politicians experience, ladies and gentlemen. And that's the reason why there will be less support from these supporters, because they feel that these political parties are too harmful, and then supporting them might also harm me and also my family. And this less support is going to be the one that pushes the political party to change the directions, ladies and gentlemen. Because right now they see that there is no benefit of creating hate speech. There is no benefit of touching people's emotion in regards to immigrations, because people are not going to support me anyway, and people do not support me anyway because they're all afraid of the violence that might be conducted by minority groups. This is what's going to push them to change their direction, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not saying that they're going to be left suddenly. Of course, they always need to be distinct from the other political parties, but at least they're going to stop all the hatred or all the hate speech and sentiments towards the minority groups, towards immigrants, towards Muslims, towards LGBT. I mentioned it again in the country, ladies and gentlemen. And we believe that is very positive, because then this violence that they incited can be stopped. So what I have explained to you in this debate. First of all, I have explained to you that negotiation is important. That's true, but we need something to push them to the negotiation table, and there will be no other way but violence. And also, I've explained to you how this is also going to change the direction of political parties in the future. For all those reasons, we beg you to vote for this motion.
Ladies and gentlemen, the principle of self-defense cannot be decided simply based on philosophy. Why? Because the principle of self-defense only arises after a direct threat, and the extent where self-defense can be exercised is only to the extent when it minimizes the damage towards you and minimizes the damage towards everyone else. Thus we argue to you that that principle must not be just simply by saying at least we can defend ourselves. You must assess this whether or not this ultimately creates a better Europe in the way that disenfranchised community envisions it. So let's talk about the principle of self-defense first, after philosophically dissecting it. Ladies and gentlemen, we must understand that this is a decision made by the disenfranchised community, right? This is not the consideration that will be taken by the court, where after you punch or you kill a white Caucasian on a public, and you will be brought to the court, ladies and gentlemen. So what will happen in the situation? Most likely, it's harder to say that when I kill someone because in the past a white majority suppressed Bohemian, from a Middle Eastern minority, now I have the right to self-defense. As opposed if the white majority punch you back and maybe kill you, they can say that there's a direct threat coming from that minority because they were trying to do bad things against me. So what does that show to you? That principle of self-defense can be exercised both ways. From you who think that in the past there was a threat that justifies self-defense, as opposed to the white community, the extreme right community that also have the right to self-defense against a direct threat. Most likely, the court will give it in favor of the extreme right because they are facing a direct threat in comparison to you. What does that mean? That can empower the narrative that you as a minority is violent, and it perpetuates the narrative to the extent that now we as the extreme right have to exercise our constitutional right of self-defense. No, thank you. So we argue to you that ultimately the threat of self-defense is useless if you cannot prove it in the court and have it enforced as a legally actionable right. It's no use for you for having the discussion in your head. No, thank you. Well, then we argue that in short term, self-defense will not happen, but even if it does, it comes at the expense of creating moral labels toward your your community at large. It is against the principle of self-defense because self-defense can only be exercised insofar as it does not harm the right of the two individuals who are in the case and in the heat of the moment. Let's talk about long-term impact, which is disenfranchisement from political discourse. Number one, we are against Bram's argument, arguing that, extreme people will suddenly become not extreme. Why? Because extreme right politicians gain their popularity up until now by appealing to a very specific type of people in society, which are people who are maybe racist, who are not yet been able to open up to discourse. So just because now you are threatened, that does not mean that this party will suddenly want to lose all of its critical supporters and become just like any other party. So what do we tell you? That most likely just because you threaten them, that does not mean that suddenly they will change. No, thank you. What do we do then as disenfranchised community? We are already supported by political parties, which are left politicians. We argue that Angela Merkel allows more immigration. They call for more support for these kinds of people. We argue there are a lot of politicians who want to do this. There is the European Union are creating schemes, for example, to distribute the burden of sharing immigrants to the extent that insofar as to allow more refugees to come in. No, thank you. But most likely, the moment we as disenfranchised community shows violence, it becomes harder and harder for this party to maintain their support towards us because they still need to appeal to the general majority who dislikes violence in the first place. And most likely, when you allow this violence to happen, there will be media portrayal that is biased against us, made by right-wing politicians who say that all of this happens just because they are crazy. Look, yeah, counterbalance media also exists. But most likely, number one, you don't watch every news just so that you can counterbalance information. But when the information is already tarik-tarikan, when it becomes confusing, most likely, left political party would just not risk anything and just prefer not to say anything about it and not continue the support. Rather than continuing the support comes at the expense of losing certain people's supporters, especially when you also argue to us that most of these immigrants are unable to vote, so they are not constituents compared to people who dislike violence. No, thank you. Lastly, then we are going to be able to be invited to a proper discourse. So this case has imploded because his violence is also to get discourse. That's number one. But number two, discourses can only happen if people are tired for the violence because the violence is never ending and those sides are able to win. But based on sheer number alone, most likely the extreme right politicians are able to win compared to the disenfranchised community. So there is no cause for them to continue their self-defense action, their self-defense gig in the court, because most likely they will be able to win. So they would not be able to get tired of the violence and impact on the discourse. They would rather continue it and let us self-defend ourselves, prove it to the court, and empower the narrative that these people are extremely violent. No, thank you. So, Gaby's argument. Why immigrants must care about an ideal European community? Because we immigrate to that country, we live there because we believe that there is a better community compared to where we were before. So we at least need to make it a better place to live in order for our sacrifice not to become waste. No, thank you. We argue that the cycle of vengeance only creates difference of idea, only solvable through violence. That is not a good narrative when you as a small community believe that the only way for you to become dominant is by allowing violence, because that also means that most violence would continue existing, ladies and gentlemen. Creates more reason to empower the extreme right narrative, exactly because now you agree that only when violence happens, then the idea becomes important. We don't like the kind of European community because that is harmful towards us as a disenfranchised community who will most likely lose in a physical battle. Ladies and gentlemen, that is not a good strategy for them. It's counterproductive towards us because the most probable response of this extreme right is always to continue the violence. So the result will be this. Either Europe will be plunged into chaos, which is not a good place for our constituents, for our children who wants to go to school, and for our people who wants to go to work, and for people who escaped from previous violence, for example. But most likely, this allows other disenfranchised community who has not yet decided the need to become a political platform to be able to speak up because they are afraid that if they become a political platform, they would have to enter into such kind of battle that would only result into bloodshed, that would not result into change, and will only empower a narrative that is always working against their favor. Very powerful for Sister Revaldi.
For a long time, extreme measures like violence have been used against a system that systematically disenfranchised minorities. For example, we're talking about Malcolm X, an American activist to ensure civil and political rights of those of African American citizens. If we do it right, and if we do it with perseverance, we can repeat the history. Ladies and gentlemen, what is the stance of opposing government? First of all, we're going to unite in already existing political, a union that has gathered so many minorities community. We have anti-fascist group that basically composed of different type of minority who have similar views. That is in order to stop discrimination. And I feel like minority have been tired of trying to compromise with majority, and that will result into them believing that violence is the way to go. Not only we're going to unite, but we're also going to do strategic attacks. For example, we're going to stop neo-Nazi political rallies by actually creating violence against that, so that the rally can stop. We actually can sabotage right-winger companies who actively endorses political candidates and right-wing candidates. Or for example, we can kidnap a leader that is accused of kidnapping kidnapping social and progressive movement member and kill them, and we're going to kidnap them until they basically confess, and fair trial will be conducted at the end of the day. That's what we're going to do. However, before that, several responses. First, they said to us that as a good minority, we should engage and emphasize to their grievances. However, you have to engage in a context where you are avoided if you wear hijab, or actually when you disclose your religion to majority, ladies and gentlemen. So if you want to basically empathize to your grievances, what you get is not a proper response. However, what you get it's a constant blaming that you are the reason why Europe is not being safe at all right now. And that further hurts minorities, because minorities want to try to understand the problem of fascism. However, at the same time, they have to compromise. They basically have to compromise and actually leave their identity. Some actually strip their hijab, ladies and gentlemen. Some actually do not want to come out as a gay or as a Muslim because of that. We want to keep compromising, and compromising will only result into lesser evil, and there's a point we have to completely leave our identity, ladies and gentlemen, only for the sake of being accepted to the majority. No. Second, let's talk about the changement of ideology. Opening opposition, we believe that when people realize that how corrupt the government is, it's going to change. However, we're talking about citizens whose definition of corrupt is ironically corrupted. Ladies and gentlemen, they cannot even determine what policies that are logically good and what policies that are good based on their emotions, ladies and gentlemen. And this is one of the parameters that you cannot make, that you cannot actually choose a policy that is good for you at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen. So this thing is going to last long. By the time when they understand how corrupted it is, people have lost their lives. Many women have been forced to undress, ladies and gentlemen. Gay rights are banned, and that is where you do not fulfill your responsibility as a fellow minority to the current generation, ladies and gentlemen. Because you realize so much on change, and you only benefit the older the next generation to do that, which is not your father's responsibility now, right now.
Take one.
No, moving on to my argument. Ladies and gentlemen, first I'm going to specifically argue to you why in the context of Europe the discourse is going to be dangerous. Second, I'm going to explain to you why we have to do it right now. First, ladies and gentlemen, different with opening government, we're going to specifically talking about the context of Europe. We're talking about economic turmoil that have been happening right now. The people become reactionary when they're dealing with problems, ladies and gentlemen. That has led into people not believing into the long-term benefit that they can get, they can get if they accept Muslims right now, just because people are fearful towards the terrorist attacks, ladies and gentlemen. And at the same time, the rise of right-wing political parties forces small political parties in order to compromise the policies when they are doing the coalition itself, ladies and gentlemen. We're completely stuck with the concept that we have to choose the lesser evil for the sake of the society, which is completely bullshit, ladies and gentlemen. That has led into Golden Dawn Party, who is actually 1% of the vote, becoming the third largest party inside Greece, and WIGGLYPUFF is actually the first contender, ladies and gentlemen. This is the real context of Europe. This is the context that you should buy from closing government, okay? Why do you have to do it right now? Because even though they are still on the rise, they are still yet to be elected. If we don't do it now, we're afraid that when they are in power, surely they become attached to the military power. That's how they're going to be more harder to defeat. For example, when they are not inside the parliament, they might create propaganda and hatred towards minorities. However, they are not able to order military officials to witch hunt social progressive movement. That will eventually happen in the future, ladies and gentlemen. Just like how in Russia, Greenpeace movement, who completely sabotaged polluting equipment, is completely tortured and punished 15 years in jail, and that's not been happening in Europe right now, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that we should do before they become militarized, ladies and gentlemen. Why is it good? First, I'm going to tell you what is the likelihood of this can happen, ladies and gentlemen. We say that people of Europe can be bigoted and can be intolerant. However, they can be afraid. You need to be, so in order for them to make sure that what you are doing is currently wrong, is that they need to be physically harmed, because their mind is corrupt and we cannot rely on their altruism, because their altruism is no longer there. Just like why we keep criminals in jail, because even though they actually have done crime, we cannot ensure whether they actually can rehabilitate by themselves. In order to do that, we need to get a notion that the cost of doing a crime is much bigger than the benefit of crime, such as the cost of doing bigotry is much more compared to the benefit of doing bigotry. That is how we're going to change the perception of society. Firstly, and secondly, we see that it is very good because this is an ultimate form of active empathy to the victims, ladies and gentlemen. Why? Because minorities feel alone, they don't feel represented. If they feel represented in the current media, it's about them actually doing crimes, ladies and gentlemen. So that's why, in order for you to completely make closure towards the minorities, you have to make a solid. You have to solidify your power and then create a dominant narrative that you are not alone, that we are here for you, ladies and gentlemen. And that shows how violence is the way to go. Vote for closing government.
Prove to you why closure towards a marginalized group, whether or not these are LGBTs or immigrants or people who are poor that loses out inside globalization, is the solution for that is a less polarized society. And for that, we need to believe that European Union and its value does work. We need to believe that social liberal values and diverse groups and open barriers can work for us. And to do that, we cannot be anarchists. We need to believe in the system. And that's what I'm going to prove to you today, why it would work, and point out why we can never provide justice or fair trial by this mob paradigm that the opposing government ever wants. Now, going on towards my case, right? What does it take for us to win over the right-wing parties? If we are a marginalized group, if we are like somewhat who are a liberal individual, we think we need to provide the belief that the political system can work for us. We think that Malcolm X and the reason why Black Panther inside the United States, their movement failed to create any real policy change towards the United States and African American because they decided to work outside the system. They did not become the constituent of the Democrat Party, and they think that the Labour Party or the more moderate party think that they're not a valuable constituents to be tapped into. So moderate parties become more for them to win the votes. They incline more to use the rhetorics and identity politics similar to right-wing parties. This is in this case, if you want to talk about the European Union, we think that we're now pushing politics to become the worst polarized extreme, and having the belief, and all parties are now saying for them to win, we need to take the anti-EU rhetorics. That's what happened when people who start disbelieving of the system. The case of Greece is that the now winning party is the anti-European Union, who is an extreme left. And also Golden Dawn still wins because these leftist parties believe that for them to also tap into the marginalized group, to the people that fear immigrants, to the people that also are losing work because of globalization, is to believe in the anti-European Union. So we think that if we do want to create a real change, we need to provide policies that work. We need a less polarized politics to exist because it cannot be based on a mob behavior, us taking up stick and guns against this right movement. Because mob behavior makes society less rational. Why? Because they no longer follow what they believe in based on policies, but based on the groups and what the group wants. It's based on the fear and based on the hatred towards another group. So the right will always forever be my enemies, disregarding perhaps some of their policies might actually be, you might have the same social grievances that you can compromise into. We think that for people to be rational and to pass policies, we need more Labour parties to win, and joining the system is what creates that. Before going on.
That's exactly what we want. When you push the individual's instinct to survive has become their primary need, it's what causes reconciliation because they would want the violence.
Well, it doesn't. Okay, but under your assumption, if you want to be based on survival instincts, you won't look at it at the long term, what would be needed inside the society. You won't look on what's needed for the European Union. You would only think of yourself, and you would only think of your enemy. And that's what disrupts the European Union and your ability to stand as a greater nation, ladies and gentlemen. We think that for people to actually believe inside the European Union and to vote for the left, and we think that they need to understand that the economy might work, and that means less disruption due to this anarchy that they're trying to make, less slumps inside the stocks, less inside the media saying that the European does not work to provide what the people actually need, because those kind of news is what empowers the right-wing parties and makes the Labour parties actually lose. Before going on to my second point, NEQI from the closing. Okay. Now, going on towards the engagement to the closing government, right? Can we ever achieve fair justice or trial if we undergo through a polarized political system? First of all, this assumes that their movement can gain mass power and mass supporters. For them to do this, it means that they need to provide us an explanation why certain beliefs of LGBT movement or labors and all of that could create the same social grievances to everyone, instead of being the enemy that the people fear for, instead of being the cause of the problem on why European Union failed, ladies and gentlemen. So we don't think that you can't unite them inside your cause when you actually create this small paramilitary groups inside the society. But second of all, if we polarize the society, we could never achieve a fair justice system, because then it's based on who's in power. You would only repeat the mistakes of South American countries such as Argentina or Chile and those kind of movement in the 1990s with the leftist communist people taking up arms against the liberal neo-conservative economy, right? You're trying to polarize society so much that the change of government becomes instead of like having a diverse group of people, like we want inside European Parliament, for example, you have one group winning, and you can never achieve a fair justice on that because you would always assume that the other group is wrong. There's no middle ground during that moment. You're deciding based on ideological beliefs instead of the policy that might work, a compromise that can be made. Because actually you can provide compromises, right? You guys, both left and right-wing parties, can concede that the European Union is somewhat faulty and austerity is problematic. And perhaps the solution for that is different forms of policy. Perhaps it's protectionism, or perhaps it's other means. But those kind of policy discussion won't occur if you focus so much on identity politics, such as what you are doing towards LGBT, or what you're doing towards Muslim groups, or whatever things that are so specific to individuals' identity. We think if what we want is a more accepting society, we need to solve the main problems inside the European Union, and that requires policy changes, and that requires compromise, not riots or like anarchy that the whole government eventually. Thank you.
Leftist miskin. Leftist miskin. Satu orang kiri. Politik kiri.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to open the debate by having a hypothetical question. Imagine that we live in an era before World War II, saying that, okay, Nazi is developing, but what we need to do is speak to them. What we need to do is having diplomacy to them. I'm very sure that Nazi now will win World War II. The reason why they lost is because the victory made by the Red Army of Russia and the fight between the anti-fascist group to them. Sometimes the language that the fascists understand is only violent, and we need to speak the language they do understand. My speech will comprise into 3 points. The first one, I'm going to talk about whether or not it's morally legitimate for us to commit civil disobedience, including the actions of violence. Secondly, I'm going to talk about likelihood whether or not our strategic attack will be meaningful to weaken the position of the fascist group. And lastly, I'm going to talk about discourse, which, by the way, is an never-ending debate. Move on to the first questions about whether or not it is morally legitimate for us to do this. Opening opposition trying to be supremely naive by saying that status quo is already better. But by the way, it's completely wrong. In Portugal, the left-wing party who wins the election was annulled and the decision was annulled by the right-wing incumbent by setting the status of emergency, saying that Portugal cannot be ruled by a communist party. Right now, Viktor Orban is the controller of police department that almost captured and witch hunt the social activists who agree on immigration. And more than just that, it's more than just campaign and also hatred spreading. It's an action of violence. Almost all members of Golden Dawn Party are accused to do kidnap and murder. And by the way, the leader of Golden Dawn was not persecuted in Greece, which is a sad truth. French right-winger give you soap after you handshake with the black community because saying that you need to wash your hand because it is contaminated by disease. And that's exactly what right-winger do. Right-winger is not speaking on television. They do the action in the grassroots community, inciting violence that is dangerous. The situation is not getting better. They are saying that right now we should maintain the presence of peace and should be abstain on violence. 3 responses. Number 1, we don't think that is the value that progressive community in Europe should maintain. Because Europe is very friendly to the culture of revolution and violence. French Revolution was done through a bourgeois fight against the feudal and monarchy, which justifies and was praised highly by the community of Europe. Nazi was fight through violence, and also we are also dealing with labor strike in Iceland. When when 95% of the labor do labor strike, attacking the company, resulting into a betterment of minimum wages. What I'm trying to say by this showing this numerous fact is that people are tolerant to violence if it is justified. If it's proven that the only way for us to fight is the violence, people will have better tolerance. We are not talking people in Indonesia that are trapped into the culture of fear and silence. Second responses, we think that the discourse from this will be beneficial for us when we are doing violence. Why? Because the reason why now socially progressive community is losing power, because there is a huge fracture between centrist party and also anarchist group. What happened right now is that we are losing the support from anarchists, so the centrists have no option but to coalesce with the right-winger group. What we need to do as a centrist group and also as the common majority, ally of minority, is to get an ally from an anarchist group because they are a strategic voters right now. By the way, Brexit was won not because by the UKIP but won by the anarchists who also support Brexit. What I'm trying to say, they are a very strategic swing voter that must be gathered and must be coalesced rather than be disenfranchised only because they carry the umbrella of anarchism. Third response, we think that the narrative that we are targeting, the voters that we are targeting is not the fascists because haters gonna hate always. What we are targeting is the skeptical, the anti-establishment community who are skeptical to the political system that is corrupt and dominated by the military power of the right-winger, and what they need to do is to build the emotion so they can belong to the political system. That is exactly what we need to do and not existent in status quo. NEPOI. Thank you. Second things, we are talking about how are we going to create better situation here. They claim that right now they don't want to create distortion in media campaign. We don't think that the distortion will be happening. Why? Because the problem itself, any intellectual discussion will not be relevant in European society right now. Why? Because that's what Santo has been saying. European is sadly having an unprecedented reactionary culture because of two things. Number one, they have a very bad economic turmoil when Europe is the only continent that has 0% GDP growth, for God's sake, which is very dangerous. And they also carry an unprecedented terrorist attack. France was terrorized twice, which is unprecedented. This creates an anti-comfort zone. When people do not listen to argument, people listen to emotion. Any provocation that put a black sheep and also scapegoat into situation will be perceived as a good idea, and that is minority, especially immigrants. And more of that situation, this becomes a culture where we cannot negotiate in parliament. They say that parliament can coalesce and compromise. What happened is that the centrist party always listen to the right-winger, resulting the right-winger to get more spotlight and get more power. And that's exactly when we lost. Because what happened, we always compromise bigotry policy as a part of accommodative policy, which is dangerous to minority. Lastly, what we are talking is a context whether or not the discourse will be powerful. There are two things that they are saying. Closing opposition tried to say that what we don't want to create a narrative of loss because Black Panther lost and Black Panther is creating a bad trauma where the community doing violence, they will lose power. Two responses. Number one, I agree, Black Panther lost. But Black Panther, by the way, is a very good inspirational story for a Black Lives Movement to fight right now. Loss is not always an automatic loss for us. Losing power becomes a martyrdom that is very powerful for a greater movement to fight. And that's exactly an expectation of us. We want to carry on the emotion of the victims, the emotions of the immigrants that are not taken care by the government into our power of propaganda. But second and the most importantly, what we target is the people who are pragmatic. Voters of Trump and voters of Marine Le Pen, who is by the way coward, but they are afraid of being threatened. The company who are pragmatists and want to maximize profit, those are what we attack strategically. And those are the people who will lose their hate and will lose their support in order for them to survive. We are more than proud to support this motion.
extremists are the most insecure people in the world. And what that shows you is that, and that's why they translate into violence. And if we are, and these people, extremists, the anti-immigrationists, are people who fear globalization, who fear immigrations, who fear foreigners, ladies and gentlemen. And if you ask us as left-wingers to commit violence against these people, we're basically just like them. We are the people who fear negotiation, who fear civilized discourse, ladies and gentlemen. And this is why we think CO is winning this debate. Because we propose something else, ladies and gentlemen. We want to stick to the system. We want to change it from within. We want to empower Labour Party, ladies and gentlemen. And we think that's possible, and I'm going to show you why. But before going to show that, let me point out several factual inaccuracies of Rifan's speech. First of all, Rifan says that Golden Dawn is such a belief. Right. First of all, we think Golden Dawn is not even winning in Greece. They only get 7% of seats in parliament. Second of all, they believe that Black Panther movement is actually pretty successful. Ladies and gentlemen, changes happens long after Black Panther movement exists, ladies and gentlemen. At the time of Black Panther movement exists, nothing significant happens. They're just as small as this trivial movement that people don't care about, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm afraid that the riot will not just end there, ladies and gentlemen, but even backflashes what we've been trying to achieve further, ladies and gentlemen. But let me firstly talk about how do moderates will think about our movement, right? They believe that moderates will tolerate violence because they understand that even Nazis can be beaten through war. Ladies and gentlemen, we think we look at the current context where European nations are the most civilized nations in the world, where they have long forgotten the war and all the violence, ladies and gentlemen. They've been used to this culture of debates and discourses, ladies and gentlemen. The language of violence is something that still scares them now, something that they're not used to now, ladies and gentlemen. And even moderates, ladies and gentlemen, will not find your this left-wing party's movements appealing to them. They're afraid because probably some of their people are working for the police officers or for the soldiers, ladies and gentlemen, who are killed in the riot between left-wingers versus right-wingers, ladies and gentlemen. You're only creating bloodshed, and bloodshed no longer invites people to participate or to vote for you, ladies and gentlemen. And we have to understand that the only one that we should convince the most is the moderates, the swing voters, ladies and gentlemen. And what does appeal them the most, ladies and gentlemen? What appeals them is empathy. And there is a strong reason for that. A research says that as non-violent movements are 100% more likely than a non-violent ones. The reason is simple, because if you empathize with the other people suffering, with the other people's side of story, and in this case, left-wingers try to empathize with the right-winger side of story, which I will explain to you why it's important, ladies and gentlemen, that's a competitive advantage. That's your strength, and that's what appeals to people, because that shows how you're listening. So let's talk to the first question. Is violence necessary, ladies and gentlemen? They believe that the rise of right-wing beliefs, and that's why it's necessary to commit violence. Gaby has explained that there are progresses, but what's actually done and what that shows you? First of all, a new mayor of London is actually a Muslim. But they then say, but people are now forced to take their hijab off. But ladies and gentlemen, burkini ban has been revoked by France's highest court, ladies and gentlemen. And other examples, for example, Merkel condemns anti-Muslim movement and at the same time is willing to take in more refugees, ladies and gentlemen. What that shows you? That shows you that changing system from within is possible. And that's why we think we should engage in a constructive discourse rather than riot. And I'm going to show you why we think violence is going to disrupt the discourse itself. But then they say, but we're also being attacked physically, right? If we're being attacked physically, ladies and gentlemen,